Dr. Crystal Trebet, and I'm here working with the UCI Black Alumni Chapter Oral History Project. And today we are going to have an interview with Harry Legrand. Harry, can you tell me how I should address you?
I'm fine with Harry.
Okay.
Pretty informal. I think Irvine kind of cemented that in me at some point. So I'm less formal than maybe a lot of people are.
Okay, great. And I forgot to say the date, but today is August 30th. And again, so grateful to be here with you, Harry, so that we can hear about your UCI story. So I'm going to ask just some basic background information from you. Where did you grow up, Harry? Where are you from?
Well, I grew up in San Bernardino, California, which is probably about, I don't know, it used to be like 60 miles away from UC Irvine. A native California, grew up there all my life, attended San Bernardino High School, and I actually got excited about Irvine because a couple of my older classmates had attended and came back and just raved about the campus. So that was kind of the beginning of my acknowledgement of UC Irvine.
Oh, that's really interesting. Can you tell me again, where did you go to high school, and what were you interested in when you were there?
So I went to San Bernardino High School, and I initially thought I wanted to be a teacher. Education was like a big thing in my family. My folks were raised in the South, in the segregated South, and so they weren't able to attend college. And so it was really important to them, for my sister and I, to go to college. I mean, that was kind of their singular focus. Didn't know what it was, didn't know how they were going to pay for it. And I probably went more for them than I did for myself because it was such an important piece of them. So I figured I liked school, so teaching was the thing that I would try to do. I was active in high school, and drama, and they had a program at a local department store. They call them Big Men on campus. So my senior year, I got selected in that role, and so worked at a department store, which would give us clothes to model in school. That was kind of the latest fashion, and so did a little modeling as a senior in high school as well.
Can you tell me the names of your family members? You mentioned your parents, and you have a sister, just one sibling?
Yeah, I do. I have one sibling. So my parents, my mom was Ruby Legrand. Ruby Shannon was her maiden name, Legrand. And my dad was George Tyree Legrand. They were both from Arkansas. I have one sister. She's about 4 years younger than I am, Diana Legrand. Now her last name is Riley. She also attended UC Irvine after I did. She used to tease me. She goes, "You're still showing up in the orientation videos." And I said, they really need to change those things. So she graduated in actually 1980.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
I attended from 1971 to 1975.
And you mentioned that you had some friends of yours that had attended UCI. Can you tell me about who they were and what they told you?
Well, one was Reginald Brown, who recently passed away with COVID, not too sadly. And the other was Gary Kirkwood. And interestingly enough, from high school, these guys used to put on these like theatrical performances. And so we high school students would do performances out at either Cal State San Bernardino or sometimes San Bernardino Valley College. And then I'm trying to remember specifically what they said about Irvine. They just was talking about what a great campus it was, and it was kind of intimate, and it was new. And I know this about myself. I don't like old things. I'm not an old person. I don't like fixing things. And so, and I had not ever been to the campus before I applied and got admitted. Irvine was my first choice school. And so I know I looked at UC Riverside, but it was really too close to home, and really didn't look at any other place. But so, well, okay, it's near Newport Beach. It can't be that bad. So it might be worth checking out. So.
Did you know what you wanted to study when you applied?
I did. I was an English. I was an English. I thought it was going to be a humanities major. Then I had to take subject A, and I thought, well, maybe English is not my strong point. So I then decided that maybe mental health would be where I would wind up focusing my attention. So even though I was a humanities major, I knew I wanted to transfer into a social ecology because it had the practical parts of it, and they had a mental health component. So even though I was still in humanities, I started taking courses in the social ecology area, and then was able to use a lot of my humanities courses as breadth requirements. So I didn't lose any time by knowing that I wanted to change my major. So I just kind of kept on track, which I guess was a smart thing to do. I don't know if I consciously knew that when I was doing it, but I knew that I wanted to. I thought psychology was what I wanted to do, and so I figured that was a focus I would pay attention to.
So you had a really good sounds like a really good understanding of what you would study at UCI. I think in the past in applications, they used to ask, what school do you want to be a part of? What do you want to study? So you wrote humanities English. And how was that application process for you?
It was fine. Again, I don't think I really knew what I was doing. I just kind of went through the process and did the letter, the essay, and obviously it was enough to attract the attention of the EOP staff. I was an EOP student, so I should say first generation college student, first in my family to attend college. And actually kind of one of the few of all of my relatives, like my cousins and stuff, that actually went in and completed a four-year degree. So, and I think because of that, even in my neighborhood, I was probably one of the few students that went off to college. And so you come back, you're almost like a little hero. I mean, because you got out, And I think once I left San Bernardino, I actually never moved back home again. So I had to work in order to attend UCI. So my first job as a freshman, I got a job in Newport Beach on Fashion Island selling women's shoes at the Broadway. And so that was my job my freshman year. And then I applied to be an RA my sophomore year. And they really hadn't had many sophomore RAs, nor had they had many people of color in the RA role. But I mean, there was a couple, but I think Charlene Hartsfield, I remember, and Charlene Chu. I remember Charlene interviewed me, I think, for the RA job. And so the year that 1972, when we became RAs, it was interesting because we figured once the first two Black students who got selected, we thought, okay, that's it. And then there probably was like a half a dozen of us that actually all got hired to be RAs that year. And so it was a really diverse RA group, and I was really excited about having that opportunity. And then I spent actually most of my work life while I was attending Irvine I worked for Disneyland. So that was kind of my employer from like my sophomore through my senior year, and actually a little bit even in graduate school. When I would come home, they would ask me if I wanted to work during the summer.
I'm going to roll back a little bit and ask you to tell me why you decided to become an RA. What aspects of that job were appealing to you?
Well, I had a decent RA. I lived in Playa at the time, which was like at the bottom of the hill. I don't remember my RA very much, but I also knew housing would be paid for, and that was like the most expensive part of going to school was the housing part of it. So I figured that would be also a way to help my folks and myself not having to work as many hours if my housing was actually covered. But I quickly found that once I did that, I learned so much more from that experience than just the free housing. And so I think I really learned conflict resolution, how to have difficult conversations. I think it kind of set me on a path for wanting to be a leader, a student leader. And so I think that I call myself a student of observation. I tend to go in and kind of do an environmental scan of wherever I am and kind of make an assessment based on what I see. about what I want to do. And so I think the RA, it was a great group of people to be with. I think Jim Craig had just been hired as a head resident then, and there was a woman named Molly Taylor Todd, African-American woman, who was like the assistant head resident in the complex. And so just had a great experience. And some of those folks, some of the RAs continue to be friends of mine to this day. And so it was a good opportunity and a good experience for me.
And it must have been, you said you were an RA your sophomore year. So presumably you had a fine first year on a campus that you hadn't visited before you applied. So can you tell me a little bit about what your first impressions of UCI were when you arrived as a first year student? And then what was that first year like for you?
I guess when in fact, my parents didn't even take me. Now that I think about it, I had to show up for uni prep or something. And my cousin who lives in LA was driving home. And so my parents said, well, can you just drop Harry off at Irvine on your way back to Los Angeles? So that's what she did. And so when I got there, I never really spent much time in Orange County. I don't even know if I even went to I might have went to the beach once when I was in high school, just really never thought about it. But it was a campus that I felt at the time like valued students. I really, Chancellor Aldrich was the chancellor. Then you called him Chancellor Dan. So there was that whole informality that kind of just started. So I got to know him. I got to know other administrators. I think that, and in talking to Charlene and talking to both Charlene Hartfield and Charlene Chu about the RA experience and what that was like for them as women and women of color, kind of continued to frame that, okay, maybe this is something that I could do. So I got assigned to Loma, which was an all-male hall. There was only 60 residents. And so I think it just kind of set the path. I had I don't know how much to talk about. I mean, I can kind of talk about my experience here because
please do.
So
Tell me about it.
Oh, I think the sound changed. It went to the computer and out of the ear pods completely. So Bob Gentry, who was an associate dean there, because after my freshman year, I did SPOP, Student Parent Orientation Program. I was one of the student coordinators for that and got assigned to the parent group. I did an administrative internship in Vice Chancellor George Roberts' office. He was an African-American Vice Chancellor. He was over academic and student affairs. And so I spent a year as an intern for him. Irvine at the time, I think my junior year, had Commuter Student Advisors, which was like an off-campus RA. And so they knew populations in Orange County where students lived and then kind of paid us to do programming in those communities. And so I did that. And I think through all those experiences, it's probably why I got selected as the outstanding student by the Alumni Association in 1975 at that Lauds and Laurels Banquet, because I was pretty active just in my role there. And it was actually Bob Gentry who said to me at one point, because I was actually really looking at counseling psychology and counseling psych programs, who said to me, Harry, you should really think about student affairs. I think you'd be really good in that. And I only recently told him that he probably set me on this path. I was on a Zoom with a bunch of retired professionals. And I said, Bob, I don't know if I've ever given you your props for that, but you kind of set me on this path that I wound up with. And it was one of those things where I said, well, yeah, people work on a college. I never really thought about that as a career option. So that's kind of what kind of got me out of the psychology area and really thinking more on this higher ed kind of track. So, my first job out of Irvine was as a head resident at UC Santa Barbara. So student housing became kind of my career path for the next, 25 years or so. Even my graduate assistantship was in housing. So I really couldn't dodge that bullet very much. And then I laughed because when I was at Santa Barbara, I applied to a counseling psych program and I went for an interview and I decided I hate this. I don't think I could listen to people's problems all day, every day like this. And then I got into management and found out, oh, wow, it's exactly the same thing. But I was grateful for my psychology, mental health background, because I think it was really helpful for me in managing people and understanding the dynamics of groups and dealing with conflict. And I actually used to tell people that when I hired you, I didn't just hire you, I hired everybody who you reported to before me, because you've adapted your style based on who your boss is. And so I was always very cognizant of that when I got a new employee, like what was their past experience and where that came from. And I think just Irvine gave me that whole ability to kind of critically think that way, and probably really fine tune my wanting to be a student observation and let me do an environmental scan and let me figure out who's a shining star and why are they a shining star, who's not doing well and why aren't they doing well, and then how can I mentor other folks along that same path.
And so far, you've mentioned a number of UCI administrators or who have influenced your path. I wonder if you can tell me a little bit more about the people at UCI who were influential during your time at the university.
So I think probably Bob Gentry probably had the biggest impact, because more of the jobs that I did fell under his area of operation. So he became, I think, a real, I don't know if I ever really termed anybody a mentor, but that's kind of the people that I followed. I think Jim Craig was the other person that I became really close to. He went on to become an assistant vice chancellor, I think, as well. But I used to laugh because his wife, they used to know how to play bid whist. And so he's a white dude and his wife was Chinese, but we'd have bid whist parties when I was an RA.
What is this game?
Bid whist, cards, the card game, bid whist.
No, I never heard of it.
Really, it's sort of like I call it the black version of bridge.
Okay.
But it's something that deep in the African American community, my parents played bid whist. I mean, it's like dominoes and bid whist are the things that you kind of like grew up with. And so, you know, I became pretty close with those guys based on that. I don't remember the professors as much. I remember taking biochemical genetics as a side thing, and I did a paper on sickle cell anemia. And I wound up getting an A in biochemical genetics, and I was just like so stunned because I thought, really? It looked really impressive on my transcript. That's all I gotta say. So science was not where I was headed, nor did I want to do that. But I think what I used to tell my graduate program, I went to Oregon State to graduate school, and I used to tell them I felt more as a professional as an undergraduate at Irvine than I felt as a graduate student in their program. And I think going to Oregon in 1976 was a little bit like going back in time. And they still had visitation hours, they still had single-sex residence halls, all the stuff that I had not experienced for years between Irvine and Santa Barbara, just based on how I think much more free in California is versus a state like Oregon, especially Corvallis, which is where I was for Oregon State. So, but I remember McGraw was one of the James McGraw was one of the faculty members that I remember having some time with. I did one drama thing. There was some Black students that were taking fine arts, and I think Reggie might have been a part of that group. And I wound up getting the lead role in Pearly Victorious, which was, I was trying to be a scene back, just a part of the scenery. Didn't want to have a lot of lines. Thought I could just be a townsperson. And I remember they kept pushing me to read for Pearly. And I said, Pearly's got a lot of lines. Pearly has to do a sermon. I mean, that's a lot of memorization. I'm not trying to do that. And the student director just kept saying, I need you to read for this. And I remember them taking us to LA and meeting with Bea Richards, the actress, Bea Richards, who had done Pearly, I think, either on Broadway or someplace. And so I was doing it and she was coaching me and she was hitting me saying, you're not getting that tenacious right, and and stuff like that. And so And so it was really funny because I kept thinking, I don't consider myself an actor, but for me to get the lead role in that play, it just kind of did something to me. And I would say, Molly, who was the assistant head resident, became really good friends with her. I mean, I wound up staying at her place during the summer, one of the summers. And I remember the San Diego Chargers were having summer camp there. And so Deacon Jones and some of the others would come over and we'd play bid whist at her place. And she was friends with Lovey Terrell, who was Jean Terrell's sister and Ernie Terrell's sister. And Jean Terrell had taken Diana Ross's place in the Supremes, became the lead vocalist for that. And so we would go to LA and I'd find myself playing backgammon with Jean Terrell and her sister and Molly at Jean's place in LA. And then I remember one day we were out, Jean wanted to get some groceries. So we went to a health food store and somebody was singing in the row next to us. And I remember Jean saying, "Hey, that's Mary." And I'm like, "Mary Wilson?" She's like, "Yeah." So sure enough, we turned the corner and there was Mary shopping. And I was like, oh, my encounter with celebrityhood. I mean, the Irvine connection is strong there. And I remember winding up taking Mary Wilson's groceries to her car. She had this little orange Carmen Ghia. And I would say decades later that they were in a concert out at Concord Pavilion up in the Bay Area where I lived. And they were staying at the same hotel. And I was down at the bar having a drink. And she came down there and I said, "You don't remember me, but decades ago, I carried your groceries to your car once Jean Terrell ran into you shopping." And when I mentioned the car, she goes, "Oh, I love that little Carmen Ghia. That is so cool." So, so I think Irvine allowed me to have those kind of exposure things that I never would have had before. And I actually think even my Disneyland experience, if I'm not mistaken, the woman who interviewed me for the work there was an Irvine grad. And so I wound up getting hired on the Jungle Cruise, like right off the bat. So I went right to operations into attractions. And there was another woman that I was kind of dating at Irvine who wanted me to take her out there because I was still working selling women's shoes. And she wanted to apply for a job. And she said, "Well, Harry, while you're here, why don't you apply?" And I actually wound up getting hired before she did. And she actually wound up getting put on the Haunted Mansion. So I think both our Irvine connections and the Disney people were an opportunity to make that happen.
You were a busy student, it sounds like. And it's I'm trying to keep it all straight. So you had a job as selling women's shoes at the mall. Was that in Fashion Island?
Correct.
In Fashion Island. And then, or also you worked at Disneyland. Was that the same time, or had you?
I had left when I got the job at Disneyland. I started working at the mall.
And so then you were at Disneyland, but all throughout this, it sounds as though you had a very vibrant life connected to UCI, where you were going, to LA and what have you, for various opportunities. What was your social life like on campus with the other students?
Well, I think because the African American community was relatively small, I mean, I think we were all pretty tight. We were a pretty tight group. And so we had that thing called the ghetto. That would be in the old, I guess, was in the Multicultural Center. I think Friday and Saturday nights we would turn that thing. And I mean, all the Black students from Long Beach State and other places would come there on Saturday night. We'd be in there till like, I don't know, 3 and 4 in the morning. I mean, they never kicked us out. I remember so many nights I was like, I got to go to work, and that's 5 in the morning, and I got to be at work in like 4 hours. So, but I think we just really gelled that way. I think it was a community that looked out for each other. I know the older African American students, they would tell us what professor they thought might be racist, and we might want to avoid that class. Or I remember they would also, Carl Fields being a good person who would often say, you guys need to start partying and get those papers written. So they would always keep the students in check. When you started to veer off, there was always an older group there that saying, "You're here for a purpose. You have an objective. You need to stay focused on what you're here for and to make that happen." And so I really appreciated that. And I think a little bit of that, a lot of that has gotten lost over time as schools have gotten bigger and more diverse. But I think and students, the Black students, most of them came from LA. I mean, my girlfriend at the time was from San Diego. She and I wound up getting married, so we've been married 43 years. So, but she was from San Diego, and then there was a few of us from San Bernardino, but most of the students, maybe a couple from the Bay Area. I don't remember that many from the Bay Area, but I know that there were all kinds of connections. I think Linda Beale and her brothers were part of Earth, Wind, and Fire. So we had all of these really kind of interesting connections. Larry Chapman was another student who actually I think was from San Bernardino, but he was in drama, and I know he passed away as well. I think from the AIDS virus several years ago, or decades ago, I should say now. But it was just a very inclusive, supportive community. And most of my friends were not freshmen. Most of my friends were upperclassmen. And that seemed to be who I used to hang out with the most. And so I think also kept me grounded, and I didn't get so much caught up in maybe some of the other things that were there. I just found their stories interesting and somewhat fascinating.
Tell me a little bit more about this campus club, the Ghetto. It was called the Ghetto, or was it a club, or was it a gathering?
It was that's what they called it, was the Ghetto. And everybody did, that was just where the Black students hung out on Friday and Saturday nights. Jackie Jackson was a student, and he would be the DJ, so he'd be spinning music. I think it would start, I don't know, like 8 o'clock. But I said the campus police, I mean, nobody ever came and like broke it up. And because it was in kind of a temporary building, kind of off, I guess the noise didn't really impact anybody. But like I said, most of Black's young people in LA and other schools knew about the Ghetto, and that would come to Irvine for that. So it was a way, I think we drew in the outside community in ways that were unusual, I think, for the time. I used to think Irvine was a place where people sent their ugly children, because when I went there, it was small. There was only cows around the campus. There was no town center, consisted of a Bank of America and a trailer and a Spritz Garden, which is kind of a pub and a beer place. And there was no bus service, so there was no transportation to the campus. I mean, that was the reason I convinced my parents, I need a car. I can't come home because there's no way for me to leave this campus, and I have to work, so I have to be able to get to work, so I need a car. So that was kind of my joke about Irvine. I was like, okay, you're here and you're trapped for the next 4 years, or until whatever. I don't know when the bus service actually even started coming to campus, but it was a pretty isolating, I think, in that case. So those people with cars, we were very popular. The Tummies run to LA to get the Tummies burgers. I mean, there was all those kinds of connections that I think you had. But I just say that the group was a tight group of first gen kind of people. And I would say I don't know, I think the school opened in 66 or 67, but whoever that first team, I got there in 71, there were a couple people that were there before us. We all just sort of gelled as a community.
Was it your class, around your class, that started the kind of weekend gatherings, or was that there before you got to UCI?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really know if it existed before I got there. My guess is maybe not, because Jackie Jackson was part of my class, and so he was the one that was DJing it. I don't remember hearing about it. I don't remember hearing about it when I first got there. I remember hearing about it after I had been there a while. But those who predated me maybe it was a year before. I don't know. So I don't know, but it was, like I said, it was probably another thing that kept the community connected and not feeling so isolated, and gave you a sense of belonging. And I think that's what I appreciated about Irvine at the time. There was not a lot of resistance to those kinds of things taking place. I thought the administration was fairly supportive of that. I mean, there were issues. I think some of the older students dealt with those more, but they always had access, it seemed like, to the chancellor and the vice chancellors when they needed it. So I always felt that the student voice was important. I remember when they were filming Planet of the Apes there. And so that was, I think that was the other thing. It was such a modern looking campus. We had all these really weird opportunities. I remember sitting in science lecture hall and these gorillas came in and we're on a break, and the professor was like, I can't compete with this, so go out and watch some film. I'm just going to stop class today. And so that was that. And I think there was some talented people from Irvine that went on and did stuff professionally in Hollywood and stuff like that. So I would say the other thing I noticed about Irvine, there were so many students that I know that have gone on to leadership positions in higher education. And I always thought it was interesting because Irvine did not have a higher education graduate program, but that so many of the undergraduates have gone off to be vice chancellors or presidents of universities. Just seems really unique to me. I don't know if I can think of another undergraduate school that doesn't have a professional degree program that's produced as many. We were at a NASPA conference, which is a National Association of Student Personnel Administrators, and there was a session, and when people were introducing themselves, and there must have been a dozen of us that had Irvine somewhere in our background, and these were like Asian or Latino or African American or white folks that have actually all had that Irvine connection, which I think kind of gelled us. And many of us, again, are still in contact with each other even now. And these are folks that came after me. I mean, these were people that just had a history. I was vice chancellor at Berkeley, and so a lot of my staff, I didn't realize they had been Irvine graduates, and so and so we'd always get this zot zot. I mean, and so that happens. Or my admissions office, a couple of people like zot zot. So so we had that connection going. It's kind of cool.
You mentioned that you had been part of SPOP. You were a coordinator for SPOP at some point.
Yes.
What other, and clearly you were in the play, right? You were the lead in a play. What other activities or clubs did you participate in?
So interestingly enough, when I was at Irvine, there were no Greeks, so there were definitely no African American Greeks, right? And so I think my junior year, the latter part of my junior year, Irvine let 3 fraternities and 3 sororities onto campus, and they were white fraternities and sororities. And interestingly enough, a lot of the guys that I was an RA for in Loma when they were freshmen started the Sigma Chi fraternity there at Irvine, and they kept asking me, Harry, you need to join our fraternity. You need to join. I said, I haven't got time for a fraternity. I'm working. I've got my own life. I'm not doing that. And they kept hounding me. And so I was like, okay, I'll think about it. And then I wound up being pledge class president. So I'm actually, I guess, one of the founding members of the Sigma Chi fraternity on the Irvine campus, the Eta Sigma chapter. So any new fraternity member, I think, has to learn my name as part of the indoctrination of joining that group. And Bob Gentry, the administrator, he was a beta, and so he was trying to get me to join the betas. But because all these guys were in my hall that I had a connection with, I just felt I'll just do Sigma Chi just to kind of keep them off my back. And it was an interesting process because the nationals were very involved. So none of that hazing and none of that stuff that you would hear about with Greeks ever took place because there was such a I would say a mothering by the national chapter to make sure that we were effective. And I know they got kicked off campus at some point for something. And I remember them writing me while I was vice chancellor at Berkeley, and saying, Harry, we're trying to get the chapter back. I think we owe some money or something. Is there anything you can do to kind of help us get back and get graces? And I said, well, I know the vice chancellor, so I can write. It's my colleagues, so I'll write them. I'm not sure that's going to do anything for you, but I'm willing to tell them you're my chapter and I'm one of the founding members and all that. So they actually were able to get their charter back at some point. So that was that. I was working a lot, so I didn't do a lot of club stuff. I was probably the worst pledge for Sigma Chi. I think I probably would have failed the test because I just really didn't study for it. But they were bound and determined not to have anybody in that first initial group fail. So I think they kind of tutored me through the exam, and I just like, this really shows you I didn't really want to do this, but I made it through. And the only initiation indoctrination I went through was the initial one. And so I think I went back for their 25th anniversary, and I had no idea what the ritual was. I didn't remember any of that stuff. I was having to people whispering in my ear like, okay, what are they saying? What is this about? What are we doing? Because I'm like, it was 25 years ago that I actually had that experience. So that was probably that was the only thing that I can kind of remember, other than I didn't do a lot of club stuff, mostly because I was working a lot. And so when I got to Disneyland, then I got a whole different set of friends that were, because they all were mostly college students at either Fullerton or Chapman College or other places. And so that wound up also being another network of folks that I had that I think, again, just kept me, I guess, okay with Orange County. I mean, we were there during the Dunbar Society and all that stuff. So it was not the most hospitable place. But I never encountered any of that kind of overt racism during my time there.
What was your knowledge of
what's
those?
that?
What was your knowledge or experience of those groups while you were in Orange County?
I knew they were out there. We would hear about them, but they never came to campus. I never saw them present there. Just you knew that maybe there were certain parts of Orange County you just didn't want to hang out in, or it wasn't a good place to go, or there'd be some of that. Now in Orange County, I think turned blue in during the Obama legislative era, so it's changed quite a bit. But I think a lot of that probably had to do with Irvine and the number of people who actually stayed there once they graduated. And usually where there's a college, it's usually a more liberal environment anyway. And so I just think that's played a role in that whole experience. But yeah, I think I've always had like leadership kinds of positions while I was at Irvine, and so I've never really felt. I guess I've never really been a follower. I never really thought about it in that sense, but I've always kind of been, like, even with this fraternity, becoming pledge class president, again, another leadership role. And I think because those guys respected me as their RA, I think they just automatically saw me kind of in that role, even for them, even though most of them were Jewish. It was funny because they used to have a play on words. They would call it Sigma Chi instead of Sigma Chi. And I think when we had to go through when we got our final acknowledgement, I think we were at the Newport Beach Yacht Club. And so I think some of those old Sigma Chi's were a little bit surprised to see the diversity of the Irvine chapter that when we went through that process. But again, didn't feel any open hostility, but definitely could tell by the look on their faces this was not the fraternity that they knew from wherever they had been before. So.
And from hearing about the leadership opportunities that you had through UCI and your affiliations and your clubs, and then now, in your post UCI life, taking on a number of leadership roles as well, it seems, and I think you've said it, that UCI really helped shape you or influence your trajectory in that way. Are there other ways that UCI, whether it was through your associations as a student or social life, has shaped your career or your home life?
I would say probably two things affected my professional life. I think one was Irvine, and probably the other was Disney. I mean, Disney's whole concept around guests and customer service and stuff. So as I worked in student housing for from 75 until 2000, I think 2007 is when I became the interim vice chancellor for student affairs at Berkeley. But I had been in student housing all that time. And so I had in my head just a concept of customer service and how I wanted to do things. And then I think because as I become more known nationally in organizations, I probably had the most diverse leadership team on the Berkeley campus. I remember other people saying, I'm really jealous of your team. Where do you find all these talented people of color? And I'm like, where are you looking? But a lot of it had to do with my reputation. That people came to Berkeley because they knew that I was there. I'm at this job here at Cal Arts. They pretty much are rebuilding student affairs. I got here, I had 12 vacancies that I've been trying to fill before school starts in a week or in 2 weeks, right? So I had to go to my Rolodex and try to find people around the country that I knew that might be willing to come and take this adventure with me. And I don't think if I hadn't had that kind of reputation that I think started at Irvine and just kind of carried me through, it wouldn't have been that way. I do a lot of mentoring. I have a lot of African American men. I have one guy who's at Virginia Tech who has a monthly Zoom meeting with me. He's in a new job and he wants to pick my brain and ask for advice. And then I had another guy just call me the other week. Actually, the University of California created the Harry LeGrand Excellence in Mentorship Program as part of the UC Black Administrators Council group. Yvette Galat and I think Thomas Parham. Right when I retired, I was the first recipient, and then they actually asked me to pick the recipients after me each year. I think since COVID, they didn't have the conference the last couple of years, so there hasn't really been a person. But I asked Yvette once, why me? Why did you pick me? She goes, because we can see your track record of the people that you've helped. And a lot of people talk about being mentors, but we don't really see the fruits of their labor or the results. But in your particular case, we can identify people who have worked under you or worked for you that you have groomed and have gone on to do these other things. And I said, you named an award after me and I'm not even dead yet. I'm pretty impressed that actually happened. So, and it was like this, when I took on when Fullerton called me, I didn't even finish at San Bernardino before the president of Fullerton was calling me. And when I went to his office to meet with him, I walked through the door and he said, Harry LeGrand, the man, the myth, the legend. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, I had 5 presidents at CSU telling me I had to talk to you for this interim job. And I'm like, who? And then he mentioned President Parham and President Sakaki and President Morales and President Coley. And there are a couple of others. And I was thinking, wow, that's amazing that I was never in the CSU system. All my experience has been in UC. And for them to come after me in that role, this president, I'm like, okay, you found me on LinkedIn. What made you reach out to me? He goes, I looked up your LinkedIn profile and decided you're what I need. You've done this. And I had Googled retired vice presidents and your name kept coming up. And so that's why I reached out to you to do that. And so I would say it's God, because there's nothing that Harry LeGrand has done, I think, strategically to have this kind of post-retirement career, especially as an African-American male. I mean, a brother who's, like I said, when a president gets my home number and calls me and asks me to do so, I just don't know where that comes from. I just, my wife says, you need to keep your ego in check. I'm like, I'm trying, but they're making it hard for a brother. I don't know.
Well, congratulations to you. I mean, on all of your accomplishments and acknowledgement of those accomplishments. And one of them was your wife, right? You met through UCI.
Yeah, she didn't finish. She was a bio major and decided she wanted to be a doctor and decided she was going to stop out. So we met as freshmen. We dated my freshman year, and then we broke up when I became an RA. And then she moved off to go to work for the phone company. But my family always kept in contact with her. And my family always loved her. Her family always loved me. In fact, most of our Irvine friends said, you guys are soulmates. You guys belong together. And we're like, I don't think so. I thought she was odd and she thought I was silly. So, but yeah, I was in graduate school and I actually was dating somebody else. I took my date home for Christmas and they had invited Denise to the house for the holiday and didn't tell me. So it was a little bit awkward when I got home and I had an ex-girlfriend and a current girlfriend in the same living room. But we've after breaking up for 7 years, we came back together and I told her, I said, I realized if I didn't marry you, I probably wouldn't have gotten married. You were the first woman that I had actually met that I didn't feel like I had to play any games with. I could be myself. It was totally a comfortable kind of relationship. And we became friends, and then we move off to Oregon, and we're not around family, so we pretty much had to become a self-contained unit. We have two children. My son's 41 and he works for Cal Athletics. My daughter's 37 and works for Carbon Health. They're both in the Bay Area, and actually both had sickle cell anemia, so they had a really rough. My wife's mother had sickle cell, so we knew that was in the factor. I didn't know I was a carrier until she was pregnant with my son. I can't find it anywhere in my family's history, but in the South, they probably had it and called it consumption or something else that we just couldn't really identify. And the testing was not that sophisticated, because I had a test done when I was doing that sickle cell project in LA, and they were saying I wasn't a carrier. And so when my wife was pregnant with her son and they retested me and said I was, it kind of really caught me by surprise. So I've kind of dealt with all of that. Ran for school board once, didn't win. So that was probably a blessing in disguise. I actually got offered the downtown manager for general manager for Disney's downtown Disney when they built it back in '98. But just the opportunities, again, I do a lot of consulting. So I had done some consulting for Stanford, and one of the review team members was a vice president at Disneyland Resorts. And so he invited me to meet with his team, and they brought me down there for 2 different jobs. And then finally he tells me, I've got my area's got a hiring freeze. And I'm like, Disney has hiring freezes? I didn't think that was even possible. And he had given my name to the vice president for theme park operations. She had a director of workforce initiatives. So I flew down there. They took great care of me, spoiled me. My daughter's like, take this job. I don't care what it is. It was my birthday. I checked into my hotel. I got cookies and milk and a huge stuffed Pooh Bear or something in there. It's like, you people are crazy. And gave us private seating for Fantasmic and dinner at the Blue Bayou. And then she calls me in a couple weeks, says, we don't think this job is senior enough for you. And I didn't really know what that meant. And then right before that Thanksgiving in 98, 97, 98, the first guy calls and says, Harry, I think we have the perfect job for you. We're building a downtown Disney in Anaheim like we have in Orlando. And I think you'd be a great general manager for that. And if you can be here on Friday, I've already set up a meeting with you, with the president of Disneyland Resorts and the senior vice president for finance. And I had been at Berkeley by that point, I want to say 18 years or so, still working in housing. I had been down there twice. My boss was very nervous. He had a lot of profane words for Mickey Mouse over time. And so I go down there. I have these 2 1-hour interviews. I fly home. Saturday morning, I'm out looking for a Christmas tree. And my daughter is like, this guy from Disney wants you to call him at home. And so I called Mike and I said, what's up? He goes, how's your tie? I'm like, what? He goes, all the president could talk about was the necktie you were wearing. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, first impressions, I guess, mean something, right? And I remember the president asking me, why would I leave a place like Berkeley to come work for them? And I told him it would take one world-class organization to get me to move to another one. So I guess that was a good answer, because they were offering me that job. And I had only taken a vacation day on Friday because I didn't want to make my boss nervous. So I had to go to work on Monday and tell him that I've been offered this job at Disneyland. And it's turned out they blew it, because they kept calling me like every other day if I made up my mind. And then I finally, after Thanksgiving, said, I'm not doing it. And he was like, don't say no yet. Do we need to fly to Florida? You know, don't we take you back there? And I'm like, no, I just don't think it's right. I got a lot of questions, and thought I was done. And then 6 months later, they called me again and brought me back down there. It was under construction then. And I said, I thought you hired somebody. And they said, well, they didn't really work out. We really want you. And then I realized it was an operations job and decided, I have people at Berkeley that do that level of work for me. I'm not going to come to Disney and do that. So I said, I'm very flattered that I can do something other than higher education, but I'm going to stay. So luckily for me, I wound up getting a 25% salary increase at Berkeley, not an unintended consequence, but had I left, I would never become vice chancellor. So, so I might be another factoid is that I was the first vice chancellor at Berkeley in 25 years that actually had a degree in higher education in student affairs. So all my boss, when I was in housing, was an English professor. And before that was an architect professor. And before that was someone else. So I think once again, it spoke to my leadership and and how I got that role was my boss. I was going on vacation. He said, "Harry, I'm going to announce I'm going back to the faculty while you're out, and I didn't want you to be surprised." And I just sort of cavalierly mentioned, "Is there a chance I would ever get your job?" Because I know at Berkeley that's not the case, especially since I don't have a doctorate. So I just thought there's no chance. And I went on vacation, forgot about it. And when I got back, he called me in and said, "I think he's going to do it." And I'm like, "Who? Do what? What are you talking about?" He goes, "The chancellor. I think he's going to name you the interim vice chancellor when I step back." And I'm like, "You're kidding?" He goes, "Yeah, he brought it up at cabinet and people were ecstatic that you would consider doing it." And I was thinking, I didn't even know the cabinet knew who I was. So that was the beginning of that opportunity. He left at the end of 2007. Once he said he was leaving and I was announced as the interim, I basically became the vice chancellor for the last 6 months. And then I was interim for 18 months while they went through and did a search, and then wound up getting the permanent position. And I think the regents approved me in May of 2008. So it was 18 months in that role. And so then again, I even to this day, I had a donor from Berkeley write me the other day saying, "We really miss your creativity and leadership here." And I thought, man, that's special. So, I think a lot of it, Dr. Tribbett, is my parents always taught me to treat people the way you want to be treated. And so that's what I've always done. And that's the way I've approached my work. I tell them I'm a paycheck away from being on the street just like anybody else. So I don't have any, illusions of grandeur. I kept getting promoted at Berkeley every year to a new role. And when they asked me to take over housing facilities, which I knew absolutely nothing about, I put on jeans and a t-shirt and cleaned residence halls with the custodians for a week. And they basically said to me, "Nobody in the administration has ever cared enough about us to find out anything about our jobs." And so it was a huge loyalty factor for them. They would have gone to the wall for me. But again, I think all of those kernels of how I worked were things that I remembered from Irvine or thought about that Irvine experience and how I felt as a human, as a student, that I really wanted to be able to share that as widely as I could. So I think, again, it all comes full circle back to those humble beginnings, especially for a kid coming from a blue-collar family whose dad worked at Kaiser Steel, and then to find myself. And my parents have been dead a long time. My mom's been gone for 36 years. She died a year after my daughter was born, and my dad died about a week before my 40th birthday. So he's been dead about almost 28 years now. So they really never saw what I was able to actually accomplish. But I have to think from above, they're looking down on me and should feel like a job well done. So
yeah. Wow. What a journey. What a journy you have had.
Everybody says I should write a book. And
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a true, again, testament to yourself and your leadership and what you bring to the tables that you get an opportunity to sit at, right? And also what you've been able to pick up throughout your entire life to shape your approaches. Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing all of that.
I think it's important. I think one of the things when I was at Berkeley, I had this group of African-American and Latino males that I was trying to mentor because I knew I was going to retire in a couple of years. And I kept inviting them out to my house. I said, "Let's do a mini retreat. You can pick my brain. I can help you figure out how to navigate." And they would never come. I couldn't get them to show up. And I finally asked my executive assistant, I said, can you figure out what's going on? I said, maybe my title's intimidating them or whatever. And so they finally showed up, about 10 of them. And I said, "What took you guys so long to come out?" And they said, "We've had a lot of brothers or people in your role who say that they want to help or mentor, and then they don't really meet or they don't really follow through." And I said, "Well, you should know this about me. If I'm offering something and then I'm willing to do it, I don't just do that because as a gesture." And this young man that this woman had referred me to the other day said to me, "Man, I just hear the excitement in the work that you do. And there's been so many Black men that I've tried to use as mentors, but they seem to be so focused on their own career, their own title, their own trajectory, that I don't really feel like they are feeding me or giving me anything that's helpful." And I feel good about that because it's just like I said, I think knowledge is power, but knowledge is not about control. And I'm really even with my leadership team, I mean, people said, you know, even when he's yelling at us, we want to work harder for him because what he does is he lets us grow. He lets us thrive. He lets us emote. He doesn't micromanage. He's there to kind of break down barriers and bureaucracies and help us kind of navigate that way. And, you know, I had a couple of phrases that I used. One was that students are not an interruption in our day, but the reason why we're here. And I've used that. I got that actually from a woman who used to work for me, who's now at Stanford. And the other one that I think I also stole from her was Coco when I'm having to counsel somebody, and that's consider other career opportunities, because sometimes the connection just doesn't work and this might not be the right job for you. And so try to do it in a way that's somewhat humorous, but also the point is well made. It's something that I strive for doing.
And hearing you talk about mentorship, I'm thinking a little bit or a lot about UCI's Black Thriving Initiative. Are you familiar with it?
I don't think so.
So it's it's fairly new, and was led by or is led by Vice Chancellor Douglas Haynes to really think about the ways to improve campus culture and create a place and space where Black people can thrive, and thinking about or reflecting on your experience at UCI and beyond UCI. I wonder if you might have some perspective on how the university can continue or strive or succeed in creating such a community where Black people can thrive, and especially thinking about your time at UCI. What was it that, you know, made it one that shaped you in a positive way?
Yeah, I know Doug. So in fact, I think he was nominated for that award one year. For the award was named after me. So he's a good brother. I'm glad to see that he finally got the vice chancellor job that he should have had. You know, and it's interesting because I think that it's a combination of nature and nurture. I think there's something about me innately about the way I approach life that I don't consider myself a victim, and I never have. And so I never approach things with I'm going to fail at this or as a victim in doing this. And I think a lot of times for Black people, we sell ourselves short before we even get there. This young brother I was talking to, he had a bad supervisor before. And so he was really hesitant about being his authentic self. And he's got a new boss who keeps telling him, man, I need you to be you. I mean, step up. And as I was been coaching him, I'd say, okay, you saw you got to get this. When I said, when you supervise not only you, but everybody who supervised you before me, he's still stuck in the past. And I said, you need to do a Rafiki moment with the rock in the head, and that's in the past. Sounds like you got a good supervisor now who really wants to see you thrive. And so you can't keep getting stuck in your past and letting it hinder you. And I think, you know, at Irvine, I guess I never felt stifled. I never felt like I couldn't do it, but I also didn't approach stuff with like a chip on my shoulder either. And I said, now I've got Irvine and Berkeley arrogance. It's a bad combination to kind of have an individual, because I don't have time for foolishness and I don't put up with that. And so my expectations are pretty high of myself as well as for other people. So, you know, I don't, you know, I'm willing to, if they want me to talk. I know I did speak at one of the banquets at African American, I think a scholarship banquet a couple of years ago. I was a keynote speaker for that. But yeah, if there's things that they think I might be able to help with or think about, I'll give it some more thought too about that experience. But I do think it's a combination of kind of how my DNA was just simply, I mean, my parents told me the only people that can limit yourself are you. And so that I think they were wise, even though they had no college degree. I think the lessons that they imparted from I don't know if my sister even listened to all the messages, because she's been more the entrepreneurial and had 1,000 different jobs and just have some real health challenges now. I think she just seen me as having a charmed life, but I said, my life's not charmed, but my life is ordered, and that I do have a way of doing things and things that I want to have happen. I mean, I even here, this consultant had done some work for them around student affairs, and when I met with them, they said, well, our expertise is enrollment management, not really student affairs. So anything you see in this report that we've done that you want to change, like, have at it. So the woman who's still here, who just wrote me and said, hey, I saw a job list. This is so different than it's really needed, but it's nothing that we had talked about with the consultant. And I said, oops, my bad. I didn't bring you into the tent. I just started doing the work. So I met with the president, the consultant, a couple of weeks ago, and kind of ran this over with them. They're like, "Oh, this is great." And so that's kind of where we kind of left it. So I think a little bit organizational development or organizational design is something that's a skill set that I tend to have some results in doing, just to kind of the way I approach things differently. So I don't think that answered your question, but I kind of rambled. But
No, it's okay. I just, given your experiences, I wondered if you had any kind of thoughts or ideas about it. And I also, I have just a few more questions for you. And one of them is, I don't know if you have a fondest memory of UCI that you haven't told us about yet.
Probably, geez, I had a lot of fun at the ghetto. That was a good time. I think for my parents, when they came to the Lauds and Laurels Banquet to see me get that Outstanding Undergraduate Student Award, I think for me, that was probably a really proud moment, not necessarily for me, but for them, because I think they hadn't come to the campus that often, and my mother didn't really like traveling a lot. So I was really surprised that they actually were willing to show up for that. So I think for me, and now in hindsight, they gave me a lithograph and a plaque. And in all my moves, I think I've lost it. I can't find it. And I really wish I could now, because now I've been collecting a lot of African-American art. I mean, that's kind of what I do, my wife, and that's what we do. And now I wish I had that piece that I could have framed and actually shared it that way. But I think because that, to me, brought my family into my college world, and something that they had not been able to experience. And then for them to see their son at a predominantly white institution be successful, I think that was probably one of my fondest moments.
Were there any challenges that you faced that you overcame that we haven't discussed yet?
I would say there was this one class that I took that I thought was going to be a MIC class. It was called American Automobile Culture. And it was the only class I got an F in. And it really shattered my GPA. And it took me a while to recover from that. And I probably, in hindsight, I probably should have fought it, because what he wrote on my paper was that I wrote a paper on a mediocre book. He didn't talk about the paper or the concepts or what I had done. But I was so done with him, I think, at that point. I just didn't care. But when I got that F, I thought, paper on a meteor, that has nothing to do with what I wrote about. I mean, that's the author's problem. That's not my problem. So that was probably my one, that was probably the one negative thing that I took away from Irvine, was that, okay, who is this Yahoo, and who does he think he is? And your class wasn't all that to begin with. And so for me to get an F, I mean, if I can get an A in biochemical genetics and get an F in American automobile culture, I'm just like, I ain't feeling you. But again, I didn't let that define me, and I didn't let that deter me in accomplishing what I needed to have happen. I just had to work on getting that GPA up so I could get into graduate school at some point.
Is there anything that you'd like to add that we haven't discussed, something that you wanted to be sure to talk about?
I've kind of rambled on a lot. I mean, I've covered a lot of territory. Your questions were good, and then they kind of gave me ideas to think about other things. I'm a storyteller, I guess. I probably have more than a gazillion stories I could share. But I think that from my Irvine experience, I think what I would just say is that this was the thing I also found humorous. A lot of my African American friends hated Irvine and couldn't wait to get out of there. Many of them stayed in the area; they never really left. I didn't hate Irvine in that same way, but I never went back. When I left, I just like never, I never returned or never thought about returning. And I maybe that's the way I just put closure in my life, because that was a chapter that I did. I never even thought about applying for a job there. Didn't even, that concept never even came with me. It's sort of like San Bernardino, I did that, I was done. Irvine, I did that, I was done. Berkeley, I've done that, I'm done. And so I just think that, no, I think from where I sat, and I think I had raved about it to my sister, which is why she wound up going there, and I think it's a lot of the word of mouth stuff is really important. And so, now that I'm on the Alumni Association Board of Directors, I'm heading into my second year with that. And I think one of the reasons they wanted me was because of my student affairs background and the fact that I had done that job at Berkeley, and that's one of the areas that the Alumni Association needs to focus in on. I know Willie Banks, your new VC for student affairs there. In fact, I didn't hire him for a dean of students job at Berkeley. I kind of wish I had now, but he did much. He went way further than he could. I think he's a good dude and kind of knows his craft. And so I think that the African American people that Berkeley has, that Irvine has around there now, I think they got a good group that has a lot of ideas, a lot of creativity. And I applaud the Black Alumni Association for really wanting to kind of put this oral history down. I will say there's some folks out of my generation group that seem to have issues with the leadership, I think, and I'm not quite certain where that comes from. It's like, okay, well, don't criticize if you're not there doing anything to help it. But I think them feeling like our stories are not being told, which is what this is doing. But I also think I have to give people grace, because if you come in 30 years, 40 years after this original group was there, it's a different place than how we even remembered it. And I was fortunate because I was a vice chancellor or worked in the UC system, that I would periodically get to Irvine for meetings. And so the campus changed and grew, but it wasn't a surprise to me because I was able to see it over the years and how it's morphed. So no, I just think that I've always wanted to give grace to others as they tried to find their way. And no, I think I've done everything that I think I wanted to do or could do. Time went really quickly. I'm just like, it's over.
Do you have any words of wisdom for current or prospective Black students?
Don't let your mind or your own insecurities limit your ability to get stuff done. I would take back to my parents' words. The only person that can limit you is yourself. I didn't tell this story that I had in high school, when I applied to Irvine, my high school counselor told me I wasn't college material and I should really consider going to a community college, right? Or get a job, right? And I'm like, who are you? I said, you didn't realize who my parents were. So when I got that acceptance letter to UC Irvine, that was the first office I went to, and just placed a letter on his desk. It said, how do you like me now? So, so I just think that there's a certain level of gravitas you have to have. There's a fine line between being rude and aggressive and being assertive and responsible that I think we have to oftentimes strike a balance. I oftentimes think, okay, am I going to come off as the angry Black male? Am I going to come off as like I got a chip on my shoulder? I'll tell you off in a way that you'll need some crutches by the time I'm done cutting through you, but I won't disrespect you and I won't call you outside of your name. And I just think that it's important that you hold your ground, and that probably the most important thing is find allies, I don't care what race they are, that can help you navigate through that campus. I think, like I said, I don't think I'd ever officially named somebody a mentor, but there were people that I observed that I took lessons from. And then I thought, okay, this is helping frame kind of what I'm thinking. So I just tell them to do that and to find those touch points, find those connecting points, and find each other, and don't be threatened by one another, but figure out a ways like what we used to do back in the 70s. How do we build each other up in order to accomplish the goal? I actually have a cousin who actually went to Irvine's medical school, and he's a doctor. He works for Kaiser Permanente. He's a pediatric neurosurgeon. But he started at Irvine, I want to say my junior year. And he's gone on, he was the first African-American on Kaiser's board. He's now oversees their education unit for residency programs and those kinds of things for Northern California. He told me he's about to retire. I'm like, his wife's excited. She goes, Harry, you retire and keep talking to your cousin. He needs to do the same thing. So,
what's his name, Harry?
Calvin Wheeler, Dr. Calvin Wheeler. So he should be he would have been there around in that same kind of first generation, early generation with Jim Woods and those guys that were at Irvine in the medical school back in the day when it was just getting started.
Wow. Last question.
Yes.
3 words to describe your Irvine experience.
Two words.
3.
3 words. Eye-opening, inspiring, and I'd say maybe direction setting. That's the last one. It's sort of like inspiring too, but I'm having a hard time. It's just like it was just a wonderful experience for me. I took everything I could out of it.
I'll ask you again, just so you can get the 3 words out. So 3 words to describe your UCI experience.
Rewarding, engaging, vision setting. And I say that because, not so much the campus, but the environment. I mean, growing up where I did, and when I went to this first fraternity party at this house in Corona Del Mar, where it was like a mini mansion, and I was thinking, and I'm always cool. I just like never let them see me sweat. But in the back of my mind, I said, okay, this is how I want to live. This is my objective. This is really the kind of lifestyle that I want to see if I can make for my kids and give them the kind of access that my parents were not able to do for me. And I think Irvine really, with just seeing where it was located and the wealth that was there, knowing that I could not compete with the wealth. I never tried to do that. I never tried to compete with the kid with the new BMW or the new Mercedes, but knowing that as I looked at my own life, and my wife was kind of the same way. And so I think that was one of the reasons why we look at our lives and saying, okay, I guess that really kind of set the path for how we wanted to raise our family. I mean, we were able to take our kids on international trips. You know, because of the experience that I had with Berkeley, I've traveled internationally. I was on the MasterCard Foundation, and we were doing work in Africa. Berkeley, we had 113 sub-Saharan African students that we admitted to go through, and the MasterCard Foundation paid for everything. And so I was actually brought back to be an advisor on that board once I had retired from Berkeley. And so the opportunity to be able to give back to the continent and I probably never would have made it to the continent had it not been for the MasterCard Foundation. So being able to go to Ghana and Pretoria and Soweto and Johannesburg were things that, again, are awe-inspiring. And I think if I hadn't gone to college, none of this would have ever happened. So I think I have to give Irvine props for that exposure.
Harry, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you and hearing your stories. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
More than happy. Thank you. Good luck with the project.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.